From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A special sales tax to fund small-town hospitals will be on the November ballot in 2 Kansas counties. We'll discuss the challenges of funding rural health care. Also, a shortage of qualified applicants leads to the city of Wichita to outsource some of the jobs at its new water treatment plant. But first, gunshot detection sensors and license plate readers get the green light from City Council and will soon be operating around the clock in Wichita. We'll discuss the impact on public safety and your privacy on this edition of Kansas Week. Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. Wichita police say more than 80% of gunshots fired within the city limits actually go unreported. This week, the City Council approved full implementation of a new system that is supposed to detect every single gunshot fired within the city limits and pinpoint its exact location. Police also received approval for more license plate readers to help them identify and track down potential suspects. KAKE's Nick Nelson has more on the story.
Motion passes 7-0.
The Wichita City Council approved the Wichita Police Department's request for funding to expand flock license plate reader technology and to buy gunshot detection devices. WPD has been using this technology since 2020.
It integrates with our flock automated license plate reader cameras, and there's a direct notification to officers in the field who are logged into the system that say, we identified gunshots at this location. Based on triangulation of three separate sensors that hear those gunshots.
Flock cameras take a picture of a vehicle's license plate as it drives by them. Police use that technology to track down stolen cars, wanted people, and Amber Alert victims. Nearly 2 years ago, the technology helped police track down a car with 2 abducted children inside. Councilmember Mike Hoheisel asked Wichita Police Captain Aaron Moses about potential privacy concerns.
You guys are doing a good job as far as the oversight on our end. It's just the concerns with the bigger company that we don't necessarily have the power to dig into.
Moses assures the data is deleted 30 days after it's taken.
To make it very clear, Flock does not own these photographs. Flock cannot sell these photographs. Flock cannot do anything with the photographs. To be honest with you, they don't have an interest in that. And the Flock CEO has visited here to Wichita himself and made that very clear.
Here to discuss this and some of the week's other big stories are Democrat State Representative and House Minority Leader Tom Sawyer of Wichita, Harvey County Now Managing Editor Adam Strunk, and Republican State Senator Mark Steffen of Hutchinson. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you for joining us. Adam, I'll start with you. You have a little experience with this, I understand.
Yeah,
we've had some concerns about this.
Sure, and we have flock cameras in a number of our towns in Harvey County. Some towns have let their contracts expire. I mean, they are very helpful. Like, we have had stolen cars found. Like, they can look up warrants. They can do a lot of this stuff. But I think what we've run into in our reporting over the years is oversight issues. So it's like, cities have to have, kind of a policy on how they're going to use those, but like when you have a smaller town, like maybe it's the chief who's overseeing the policy, and if the chief is the one misusing it, I mean, we had a situation in Sedgwick where a former police chief was using it to just do hundreds of searches on a person he was formerly in a relationship with and used it to actually track him down. And then we had someone it was Keachai, I believe a couple years ago, yes, who was fired for misusing that. And I mean, it works really good when you've got the resources and a system that can kind of hold someone accountable. Like, I believe this was the Wichita PD that flagged the Keachai issue, right.
When Wichita sort of holds the key to, they're the supervisory
in a certain
agency.
sense. I don't believe they have any supervisory capacity over like Sedgwick if they were searching their own system. It's like if I'm in Sedgwick, I can search Wichita's flock cameras. It's kind of like almost like a co-op is how I've had it explained in the past. But it's just like the kind of oversight of who uses those flock cameras to kind of track where, and when it's a legit thing, that's really great, but how do you guarantee it's a legit thing? I mean, you have cell phones, you have a lot of things where you have to have a judge sign off on a warrant. I feel like that's a really good check and balance, but you don't necessarily see this in this massive kind of surveillance setup we have.
Mark, I'll move over to you. Is it worth it to have these gunshot detection sensors, these license plate readers? Is it worth it from a crime perspective, do you believe, over the privacy concerns that people have raised about them?
I think that can be debated about lots of new technology, and I don't have enough experience with this to really weigh in on an educated opinion. But yeah, you know, data collection by the government always leaves me feeling cold.
Yeah, yeah. It is unfortunate though, but Tom, when you talk about this, a lot of people, if they had their daughter kidnapped or their mother was murdered, I guarantee you they would be the first to say, I want the police to have every tool at their hands to solve the crime.
Yeah, you know, those are pretty drastic cases, and certainly in those cases. But even, you know, an issue that is happening a lot in Wichita more stolen cars.
Yes.
And I think you get your car stolen, you might, you know, another tool that the police department has to get your car back might be worthwhile. I know property crimes are up and people are concerned about them. So I think the council probably did the right thing. I mean, it is early in the technology. I do have the privacy concerns, but so far it seems all right. And I think, you know, if we move into it slowly and continue to expand, if it helps, you know, it helps the police do their job better, I think most people would support it.
And I think one thing that was concerning, and Adam, I'll direct this to you, it turned out, we found out that the police department actually secretly tested these for a year or so before they were initially approved in 2021. And a lot of people found that problematic as well.
Yeah, and I wasn't a part of that. I wasn't a part of that reporting, but yeah, I can see why people would find that problematic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the program rather is moving forward, so hopefully it will be a good deterrence to crime and help police catch criminals as well. We'll move on. Wichita's new $500 million water treatment plant is ready to start operating, but there's one problem. There's a shortage of qualified workers to run it. Cake's Abby Ray explains why.
The new Wichita water treatment plant is almost ready to go, but there's one problem: not enough specialized employees to train for operations.
And we have to get this right. This is the largest piece of infrastructure our city has ever seen. I think it's going to be an amazing project, something that we'll be proud of for the next 100 years.
Public Works Director Gary Jansen asked the City Council for approval on a $1.3 million contract so the city can outsource a few specialized positions for the new facility. That money will come out of what's called the Water Enterprise Fund. While progress has been made on the plant, there's still a long road ahead of opening in April. Jansen explained the city added 20 new water treatment positions, but it's also had trouble hiring 5 or 6 process control specialists, despite additional recruitment efforts.
We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep up the effort. We're going to try to offer some additional incentives, but in the meantime, we really need to move forward with additional help and support by way of this contract.
The approved contract says Operational Technical Services, a company out of Los Angeles, will help to fill the employment gaps unless Wichitans can step up fast.
The good part about this is the contract can be canceled in whole or in part within 60 days notice if city's hiring efforts are successful.
To become a process control specialist, you have to have a high school diploma, 2 years of water treatment plant working experience, and a Class 4 certification.
As OTS will provide certified water plant operators, again, full-time, 24/7 availability.
The city says the temporary workers will live in Wichita during their time working for the water plant, and the outsourced employees will work with the current staff to train new workers brought into the facility.
And Tom, I'll start with you. Am I the only one at this table who seems maybe concerned that we're allowing people with only a high school diploma to run our water plant?
You know, that kind of caught my attention too. I figured that was part of the reason they're having a hard time getting qualified people, is that it maybe took a lot. About that, wow, just a high school diploma in 2 years, that's not that much. I also, it kind of concerns me, you know, I think part of the city's problem, and my understanding is they're not paying as much as other cities for these positions, but somehow they can hire this other firm that can get the people in. Doesn't it seem like it might be easier just to raise the pay for the positions we need? It seems like we're adding a middleman in there. I'm not quite, I do think it's good they can cancel the contract within 60 days notice, so if they do get people hired, but that kind of caught my attention too. I said, well, why don't we just increase the pay a little bit? Because somehow this other firm is getting the employees, so obviously they must be paying them more, so the city must be paying that firm even more than it would cost if we just raised. I get. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when I think this through.
Yeah. And Mark, it seems he's brought up a number of concerns as well. And the city of Wichita's water plant has run into a number of problems, this being one, another being that it's now $20 million over budget. Now, granted, $20 million out of a $500 million project may be a smaller number than a lot of people realize, but water treatment, this isn't the only industry that's facing a shortage of staffing, a staffing issue. It's more problematic than that, right?
That's true. That seems to be affecting sectors all across our economy. And, you know, it's not completely fair just to come in here and start taking pot shots at this whole setup.
True.
But, you know, you're going to invest $500 million into a high-tech system. You know, training of employees would seem to be part and parcel from day one. But, you know, that's Wichita's problem. I live in Kingman County. I'm going to let them deal with it.
Yeah, right. And you know, we have dealt with a water shortage. Of course, we've been talking about Cheney Reservoir for months, if not years now. This is a hugely important project for not only Wichita, but the entire South Central Kansas
Well, I would
region.
say it's for Wichita and Wichita's customers.
Sure.
I believe Wichita, and again, I don't cover Wichita, but I believe they have roughly maybe 10 or 11 customers. I mean, you were on the city council. Yeah, and it's a regional thing in the sense that, like, you have Cheney Lake drying up. They haven't dredged Cheney Lake. They haven't done, like, I mean, it's silted in is what it is. Yeah. It's at 55% capacity. Meanwhile, Wichita was trying to kind of do machinations with the state of Kansas so they could get more credits on the aquifer, the Equisbeds North, and that kind of got tied up in some regulatory, some court stuff, and so that hasn't moved forward, and so now they're kind of just in this position. It, to me, is what it looks like. Yeah. But yeah, it's a big deal. Water is a big deal.
Yeah, and Tom, as this project moves forward, and like I mentioned, the city of Wichita gives its water to Rose Hill, Derby, other cities. So
Cells.
other cities are
Cells
impacted.
water is
that's true.
important
I should
here.
say cells. That's correct. So it's not only Wichita that's affected by this water plant. It's a regional thing.
It is a regional thing, and water is a big issue. I mean, there's a lot of concerns about Lake Cheney being so low, and long term, what's that going to do to our water supply? So we're all familiar with water, and of course, our old water plant was sold, it had to be replaced. Yeah. But it does seem like we're getting close to the end here, and we got to make sure we have the right people running it and everything goes well. But you know, we'll see what happens. But he made an also good point too. Is we have a shortage of employees everywhere. I mean, we have an economy right now which is basically at full employment, so it makes it very difficult for a lot of industries to get employees. So, but this is pretty critical. We got to get this done.
All right. Our next story, funding rural health care. That's been an ongoing struggle in the state of Kansas for decades. On November 5th, voters in 2 counties will decide on 1-cent sales taxes to help fund their local hospitals. KSN's Derek Lytle has that story.
Gove County Medical Center is asking for a renewal of a 1-cent sales tax in existence since 2015. GCMC CEO Connor Fiscarelli says the last vote in 2021 passed by slim margins.
Probably one of the biggest barriers to getting this passed is getting that communication out there, helping people understand that it is not a new sales tax.
He says if it does not pass, they would lose out on $600,000 to $900,000 yearly, forcing them to consider closing their labor and delivery department.
We would go from posting a slim loss year to date to posting something that was closer to $1 million loss, and it would be very difficult for a rural community like ours to overcome that without some drastic changes in the way we provide health care.
In Logan County Health Services wants to add a 1/2-cent sales tax onto the existing 1/2 cent to help pay for the $44.9 million project to build a new hospital at the existing location, calling it long overdue.
We don't have a dedicated outpatient specialty space, so when we bring in things like cardiology or our pain management group, we put them in our surgery hallway, which means those days we can't do surgery.
The facility would have more accessible bathrooms for all patient rooms. She, like Gove County CEO, believed the biggest challenge is getting voters on board with a tax during a time people are counting their pennies.
They want to know where their money's going and what it's being paid for. They want the facts. They are naturally, I think, a little bit skeptical of things like this.
And Mark, I'll start with you. I don't think I've ever heard of a sales tax supporting a hospital. Is this something new, or have you ever heard of this before?
Yeah, no, it's been going on for quite a while.
Yeah.
Nothing new about it. You might not know, but I am a physician. I'm a medical doctor, and I am a rural physician. And so, I've been around this for many decades, and the reality is that it's an incredibly complex problem. But also the reality is that we have hospital taxing districts, and counties have been padding onto our property taxes for decades and decades. Some of them, like my Kingman County, has a sales tax rather than a property tax. Just south of me is Harper County, which has a property tax. Property tax rather than a sales tax. So, the supplementation of these rural hospitals has been going on for a long time, and why that's necessary is it gets into the real complexities of the issue. And the two things that I want to bring up that aren't typically discussed, that kind of just fly over undiscussed, is number one, the changing landscape of healthcare and how it's provided across Kansas and across the nation. Business has changed. The provision of business has changed, and these hospitals are caught in that. Movement of populations, changing populations, major problem for them. Also, hospital administration. The management of the business side of a hospital is very difficult, and it's perfected by very few. Unfortunately, a lot of people think a nonprofit is meant to be run at a loss, and that's not fact. You need to apply sound business principles to a nonprofit organization, and I think that needs to be looked at in depth because there's a lot of poorly managed hospitals. Secondly, is that the CMS, the Central Medicare and Medicaid Services, a federal organization that controls reimbursement. Nothing happens in Medicare, in healthcare, that's not premeditated. And it's premeditated and planned, and that plan is carried out via reimbursement. And what they're doing, the reason these hospitals can't make a profit, one of the reasons, it's multifactorial, is that the reimbursements are below the cost to provide the service.
They're losing money.
They're losing money because, to some degree, they can't make money. And, Medicaid in particular reimburses at basically 30% of cost. You're going to make money getting 30% of your costs? No. So, a big part of what's going on with our rural hospitals is inflicted by the federal government and the insurance companies with these substandards and inadequate reimbursements. Until that process is a spotlight is shined onto it, we're not going to fix any of this.
Right. Adam, I'll move over to you. Being from Harvey County, Newton, it's a smaller community that faces hospital
we
challenges.
we have a fairly strong regional hospital with NMC Health, which is really nice. It's a lot of jobs in the community. It's good. We serve a lot of the surrounding counties. So, we're in an okay spot. And I agree absolutely with Mark saying it's a very complex problem because, you have the reimbursements that are low. You've got all kinds of things. You've got the insane costs with malpractice insurance. You've got all this working in here, population. And I'll let you two guys discuss this. I mean, I think the state could be inflicting some of that problem with a failure to expand Medicaid. Because, Newton Medical Center, and there was at a Rotary Club meeting, we were talking about there was $2 million they'd probably get in if they had expansion, which they don't have now. And I know that there's some very strong differences of opinions at the legislature. I know that Kansans have a different opinion than what's been going through the legislature. That's not my job to comment on it,
right.
70% roughly. But so I think that's something that continues to come up every time we have a rural hospital problem. And again, it's what people decide to vote for. Do they want more money coming in from the federal government, or do they want to support stuff with the sales tax? And you got to respect however people want to fund stuff. So,
as a state lawmaker, Tom, should the state be stepping in to help solve this problem?
Well, this last session we actually did pass a bill to increase reimbursements for Medicaid. It's been about $60 million in the budget. But I do think Medicaid, closing that coverage gap, right now, because of the way the federal government set up the healthcare system, by us not expanding Medicaid, there is that 150,000 Kansans that fall through the cracks. And it's tough. we're one of, like, I think 9 states left that haven't done it. And I think we ought to look at some of the more conservative states like Kansas that have managed to do something. You know, the Arkansas model is one that uses Medicaid dollars to buy private insurance to fill that gap. So maybe that's one I think maybe Kansas ought to look at. I'm really hopeful at some point we can solve that problem, that coverage gap, because that would help rural hospitals and help the healthcare system fusing more money into the system.
And Mark, I'll give you the last word here, since they brought up that Medicaid expansion.
Right. Medicaid expansion is the solution to rural hospital problems is just a talking point that the Democrats and the liberals have used to try to convince people that Medicaid expansion is a good thing. To expand a program that only pays 30 cents on the dollar of what it costs to provide the service fixes nothing. It's just a political talking point. It only provides coverage to able-bodied people. It takes, some of these people are coming off good paying commercial insurance to go on to Medicaid, again, reimbursing at a loss. It doesn't make sense. It's not the core problem. We have the USDA pumping in $2.2 billion over the last couple of years into rural hospitals. We gave $10 million to the state facilities if they would redesignate and get a higher reimbursement by redesignating what they were. There's lots of outside sources. Medicaid expansion will become such a burden financially on our state. We can't go there, don't need to go there.
All right. Our last topic today, our ongoing drought, has Kansas Forest Service now asking farmers to delay harvest of their fall crops until we get more rain. The concern is that farm equipment could spark a wildfire. Cake's Pilar Pedraza has reaction from farmers.
You can hear how dry this soybean crop is as Michael Rausch passes through. And that's what's got the Kansas Forest Service concerned, with much of the state already under a red flag fire warning.
This might not be a bad time to just kind of pause and stay out of the field. I know multiple locations over the last several weeks have asked people to stop harvesting on the days with the high winds because they were getting so many fire starts.
A big ask for farmers desperately trying to survive another bad year.
The beans are so dry that they're shattering out of the pod, so I'm losing beans on the ground.
This is what he's talking about. You can see just how dried out these stalks are. All it takes is a little bit of wind to knock these pods off of the plants. There are all sorts of beans here on the ground. Each one of them is money out of his pocket.
But as for a halt,
it's not going to happen here.
He says he just can't afford to lose any more of this crop, which is already looking to be less than half the size he'd normally expect from this field.
And so usually you get 3 beans in a pod is normal, but see, I got 1 and part of 1. This bean is about half the size of what it should be.
Instead, he's taking other precautions.
I try to cut a fire break around first and just be careful. I'll watch the machine, make sure there's no bearings or anything getting hot. Don't throw anything out, no cigarettes, no sparks.
And he uses a grounding chain to prevent the combine from collecting static electricity, because there's one thing he does agree with the Forest Service on. These conditions are a big fire danger.
The fires can be very aggressive, hard to stop.
From Garden Plain, Pilar Pedraza, Cake News, on your side.
Adam, this is tough. Farmers have it tough enough, and now we're asking them not to harvest their crops?
Yeah, I chuckled a little bit on that one. I mean, people have a very strong belief in property rights. It's their property, it's their crop, it's their livelihood. It's not been a great year. The longer you let it sit, the more you have stuff fall and you have shatter and you have all kinds of issues. Like, you're going to get the crop off when you can get the crop. Yeah. I did appreciate him talking about, cutting swaths so you didn't have jumps, the static electricity, all that stuff. Because, I mean, we had one of our combines light on fire. I mean, it is a deal. And the farmers don't want fires to start either, because if you have a fire that starts in the middle of your field, you're completely out of livelihood. So that, I don't see that as a request that's going to be listened to. But on the other end, being Reno County, Harvey County, we have the Sandhills, and I mean, that thing burns every about 2 or 3 years, and it's becoming more and more of a cost, whether it's local governments departments buying brush trucks, the state putting more money into the Forestry Service to try to fight it. Like we had one fire melt down a road. I mean, we're seeing those costs jump year after year after year. And so, I mean, I don't fault the state for trying to figure out some kind of like long-term management systems, but I don't think asking farmers not to cut is going to be the answer.
Mark, any response?
To me, it was the perfect collision of a metropolitan Kansas Forest Service bureaucrat and the reality of rural agriculture. It's a little bit embarrassing, to tell you the truth. I did call my good friend Chris Olmstead, a big farmer in Kingman, because I really just wanted to see how high his blood pressure would go when I talked to him about it. Handled it quite well. Yeah, he said, you want to pay for half my year's income by me letting it just sit there and fall on the ground, you're more than welcome to do it. You know, the process of thinking through the things we can do to mitigate the problem, reasonable. Asking a guy to shut down his income, ridiculous.
And I will, to be fair, like the person who was in charge of the Kansas Forestry Service was from Burton for a good number of years. So it's not just a Topeka thing, but I agree with you that maybe this isn't the.
Out on the farm, I can tell you that.
You might have to ask him.
Tom, with about a minute left, do you have any response?
Well, I agree with these guys. I mean, I can't imagine asking somebody, tell them they can't do their crops. I was surprised at that response. And I think a good point is the people that gets, if a fire starts on that farmer's land, he gets hurt the worst.
Right. Yeah.
He loses his equipment, he loses his crop.
Those combines cost more than their houses.
Yeah, So they've got a lot of incentive to be very careful and try their best to make sure they don't start a fire. So I think that's more of an incentive than just telling them they can't.
Well, and you also have to remember a lot of those farmers are in rural agriculture or rural fire departments too, because most of those are volunteer out there. They understand the land and they do not want fires to start. I don't think that's where we need to look. But
and
that's
this brings up the drought. Seems to be, you know, we continue to have problems with drought, and not only with our water plant, but now with our crops as well. If we could just get some rain, is the state talking about cloud seeding or anything like that? Probably not.
Probably not.
But yeah. You know, Mark, anything else to add on this as a rural guy yourself? Is there any way that, you know, it's hard to irrigate. One thing that I think about is some farmers have irrigation out there, some don't. Many don't.
Yeah, most of us are dry land farmers. I certainly am. You know, Mother Nature, rain, it's the key. It's very cyclical in the state of Kansas. We've been through droughts many times before, and we will be many times again.
All right.
But it's a great lifestyle.
All right. We're out of time for this week. And again, I want to thank Tom Sawyer, Mark Steffen, and Adam Strunk for being here with us. Also, thank you to Cake and KSN for sharing their stories. Have a great weekend. We'll see you later.